A new illustrated book covers extraterrestrial civilizations visiting our Earth. JP has released a video on the Artemis Accords and of life throughout our solar system. An update on the historical UFO report that is required by the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023 is about to be released. Tom DeLonge claims that multiple gods are connected to UFOs and that these are responsible for global conflict. Former Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent Richard Doty claims that there are only 5 extraterrestrial species visiting the Earth. Credible sources tell investigative journalist Christopher Sharp that a key office in the Pentagon is stifling further UFO whistleblower testimonies from coming forward. There have been 5 top remote viewers who have focused on the coming rapture, the harvest, or the event. There's been a discovery of a huge treasure trove of gold plates in an ancient castle somewhere in the frozen domain of the United States. And these and other stories on Exopolitics Today, the week in review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome to the week in review for Exopolitics Today. There's quite a few stories, and let's see how quickly I can get through these. I aim to do it all within an hour, so hopefully I can do that this week. So I want to begin with a new book that's just come out. It is by Elena Danaan. It's an illustrated book that's really designed for the reader to identify different extraterrestrial civilizations that are illustrated in the book. I mean, Elena is a very good artist, and she has used her original sketches along with some updates featuring AI and her own artwork to be able to come up with a unique set of pictures or illustrations for the different extraterrestrial civilizations. And so this is a really useful tool for starseeds that want to reconnect with their civilizations. Starseeds, I will assume that many watching this week in review see themselves as starseeds. So this is a great way for you to be able to kind of leaf through all of these illustrations of different extraterrestrials and say, oh, okay, this one kind of like most resonates with me. So the illustrated book is called Encyclopedia Galactica. I just received my copy. I'm going to be doing an interview with Elena uh, very soon, and it is something that is well worth getting. So more on that in my interview with Elena coming out next week. Okay, so here's a video by JP commenting on the Artemis Accords and the hidden codes it represents concerning ET life throughout our solar system. So JP continues to serve in the US Army, and he is now starting to post on YouTube and also on Instagram short videos or comments that he feels illustrate the updates, the pictures that he has been releasing with me over the last 15 years. So this is an opportunity for people to hear from JP himself rather than filtered through me. And so he does have a YouTube channel now. And so, yeah, you can just go to his YouTube channel and I will just go for you. Uh, you can see it. The channel is, there you go, JP, 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 JP1. So 3 JPs followed by a 1. That's his YouTube channel. So you can see what videos he's been releasing. So here's the one that just came out a few 5 days ago, the Artemis Accord. Now let's look at this webinar that Elena Danaan did on February 25th. That was Sunday, and it was a fascinating webinar. I thought that it was very helpful in understanding the kind of wisdom that is valued by different extraterrestrial civilizations, especially the Anunnaki, or the faction connected to Ea or Enki, that he values knowledge and wisdom. And so she was taken aboard the Nibiru mothership, and she got to see an ancient library on the mothership, and was told about the origins of the emerald tablets, which were originally uh, well, I guess written or kind of downloaded into humanity's repository of knowledge by figures such as Toth, and in English Zita. She was told about that, and much more wisdom possessed by the Ea Enki faction of the Anunnaki. So this is something that is very helpful for us as we move into this civilization where open contact is occurring. That some of the extraterrestrial civilizations value wisdom and knowledge above all else. Others are more interested in conquest, domination. So in a way, those tendencies, those human proclivities that we know all too well, but by just looking in the world around us, some people are oriented to acquire wealth, capital, others towards achieving military glory, domination, and others are motivated by wisdom and knowledge. And so extraterrestrials are the same. And so this particular faction of the Anunnaki, the Ea Enki faction, values wisdom. And I would guess that many watching this also value wisdom. And so this is a good fit. This is where we get to learn what this Ea Enki faction of the Anunnaki has on board the Nibiru and why it's important. Okay, so I did an interview with Brad Olson that came out this week, where he discussed his trip to Laos, or Lao in the Laotian language, but in English we say Laos. So uh, Laos, he went to a place called the Plain of Jars and found what was it, over 1,000 huge jars, 2 to 3 meter jars, that local legends say were used by giants. So you can imagine how big these giants would have been if they're using 2 to 3 meter jars for some purpose. So he discussed that. He discussed how the US secretly bombed Laos during, well, even before the Vietnam War, in the lead up to the Vietnam War, presumably to cut off supplies through the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But he suspects that the goal was really to decimate this uh, plain of jars, destroy it as much as possible, because he didn't want, or the US didn't want, the truth to come out about this being connected to ancient civilizations known as the Nephilim, or demigods. And I think this, because the US didn't have control over this area of the world at the time, they decided to bomb it. And so very sad, but I think Brad is correct that that's probably why they did it. Okay, so there was a report by a UFO researcher that the historical study of government involvement in UFOs will probably be released to the public sometime in early March, and the date that was given by this particular UFO researcher, Stephen Greenstreet, was March 7. But a Pentagon spokesperson, Susan Goff, didn't commit to any particular date, but just said soon. So, yeah, it's very interesting. This historical review of UFOs, according to the National Defense Authorization Act, I believe it's for 2022, uh, it requires that the report shall focus on the period beginning on January 1st, 1945, and ending on the date which the director of the ARA office completed activities under this subsection. So it this report is going to be a historical overview of UFO reports going back to 1945. Now, I don't expect it to yield much in the way of kind of details for these like these historical cases, like say the Roswell crash in 47 or the Aztec crash in 48. We're probably going to get a lot of statistical data about UFO crashes. That's going to be pretty boring, but yeah, this is just starting the process, I believe. Okay, so here's something that was cited concerning Tom DeLonge. I'm not sure when he made this quote, if it's recent or something that he said a long time ago. And I guess it was in response to this viral video of a giant fight. Well, I guess there were probably a couple of dozen people involved in a UFC fight in Mexico. I think Mexico City, and so there were people fighting, and so Tom DeLonge had said at some point, and it was cited by this researcher, the one, um, who Tom DeLonge said, "quote The UFO phenomenon is about multiple gods that fight amongst themselves, and by design factionalize mankind into different religions to step back and let us fight each other." Our government knows that. It knows that the others are instigating wars among mankind. Now, this is, to my mind, a very important point, and I think it's essentially correct. It's something that William Bramley, Jim Mars, and others have said in their books. William Bramley wrote the book "The Gods of Eden" in the mid-90s. That was followed by Jim Mars. Uh, I think it was the Alien Agenda. David Icke has said things along similar lines. So this is not new, but I think it's very important to keep in mind that the UFO phenomenon does involve beings that have been considered historically to be gods, and that they have manipulated mankind. And it's very interesting if you look at some ancient texts. I think it was Hesiod, it may have been, or Herodotus. Maybe it was Herodotus. Herodotus, he described how the gods were allotted portions of the earth, and that was their domain, and that they were commanded to multiply or expand their holdings. So kind of like you might get, just think of, say, elites in the corporate world who are constantly seeking to maximize their profits, maximize their companies, and so the gods or the ETs on Earth have had a similar kind of attitude towards different territories on Earth and the peoples that inhabit them, and have used them to uh, develop a religion worshipping them, but also to expand and control and attack the other fiefdoms belonging to rival gods. So that is a very important point, and I think it applies today, right now, what we are witnessing around the world. I think that if you go to the sources of this, you find out, who's behind the deep state. You'll find that the war in Ukraine, the war in Israel Palestine. Again, if you go behind the scenes, the deep state. whose orders are they following? Again, I think you will end up with these beings, these gods, or these ETs pretending to be gods. Okay, so this was something that was very interesting. There was a story in Sky Fire News, and this was uh, something that Richard Doty, a retired Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent, says that he learned about during his time in the Air Force that there were 5 alien species, and so here you have them displayed. You see some sort of grey, an insectoid, another sort of grey, a reptilian, and then a human-looking species. And he said that there are 5, and he didn't really kind of like emphasize that any of these were particularly friendly, just that they were 5 species interacting with the Earth. Some were incredibly aggressive, others were invasive in different ways. So, but we know from other sources, and the one that I cited in my tweet here is Clifford Stone, who was a former US Army sergeant. I think he reached the rank of E6 staff sergeant. From 1969 to 1991, he served for 22 years in the US Army, and he was called away from his normal duties to go and participate in UFO crash retrieval programs, where he would be part of the kind of first responder team that would go into the crashed craft, and he would render assistance to any of the EBEs that were injured, because clearly the people conducting the crash retrieval operations preferred to find live extraterrestrials rather than dead ones, because live ones you could interrogate, find out why they're here and so forth. So Clifford Stone says that in approximately 1979, 10 years after he began, he was given he called it the EBE manual, and he said it had first aid procedures for 57 extraterrestrial civilizations. 57. So, that was back in 1979. Now, Richard Doty, he served around the same time. Well, actually, probably, around the same time. But he says he only learned of 5. So I think Doty probably wasn't given the full picture. He probably didn't have a need to know. Whereas Clifford Stone clearly had a need to know, because if he's going into crashed UFO craft, rendering first aid when it was needed and conducting telepathic communications with any injured EBEs, he would need to have some knowledge of whatever first aid he could give them. That you don't want to give iodine to a species that maybe has a chlorophyll kind of like blood supply, and the iodine might kill them, as opposed to a human that would help them heal or recover. So this EBE handbook, Stone says, was first seen by him in 1979. So we're talking 45 years ago, that there were known to be 57 races visiting the Earth, and there have been many more races that have been identified. I think it's well over 100 now that are visiting and interacting with the Earth. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there's this new illustrated handbook by Elena Danaan that discusses each of the races and gives you color illustrations for each of them. Now, Christopher Sharp, he is a journalist, investigative journalist, and he is I think, the key writer, or maybe there are several, writing for the Liberation Times. So he says that whistleblowers that are ready to come forward and talk about what they know about crashed UFOs, retrieved alien bodies, and so forth, but they have chosen to remain silent because there has been a orchestrated pushback against UFO disclosures. And so he points out that, especially the former ARROW director, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, he has played a very kind of like unhelpful role in being critical of whistleblowers like David Grush, who have come forward saying that these are uncorroborated and fanciful, and really saying that there's no substance to these, that this is really kind of like sensationalism. And so that has led to other whistleblowers saying that, or deciding that the time isn't right yet to come forward. That as long as this pushback continues, as long as you have people like Sean Kirkpatrick, who is now a consultant, a senior consultant to the ARROW office that he formerly directed, but now he's a senior consultant, that is having a dampening effect on new whistleblowers coming forward. So that's very unfortunate, but we could expect that. And interesting, according to Christopher Sharp, the Department of Defense's office called DOPSA, which is uh, has been set up to clear any kind of publication concerning classified activities by any particular author, to make sure that whatever they release is not classified. That this DOPSA office is apparently being manipulated by Sean Kirkpatrick to target whistleblowers such as David Grush. So that's very unfortunate, but that is what is going on. Okay, so I announced my new webinar coming up on March 23rd. Very excited by this. I have been fascinated by crypto-terrestrials, these underground civilizations, for a long time. And in this particular webinar, I'm going to be, in the past, I have talked about some of the human underground civilizations, such as the Agathans and the Tolosians, and talked about how they operate. In this particular webinar, I'm going to be focusing on the non-human crypto-terrestrials, the praying mantis, the insectoids, the reptilians, the Sasquatch, and how far back in history they go. And I think the big takeaway from this is that these are truly the ancient ones. These are the ones that have been on Earth for millions of years, even predating the human presence. And so they are vibrationally attuned to the Earth, to Gaia. So even though you may have insectoids visiting from other star systems, or reptilians visiting from other star systems, of course the Draco reptilian, very aggressive race, and there may be some kind of like genetic similarity between the two, we are talking about very different species. So in this webinar, what I hope to do is to point out the differences between these ancient Earth-dwelling crypto-terrestrials in terms of their own behavior amongst themselves, with surface humanity, and with visiting extraterrestrials that have similar genetics but may have agendas that are not really in alignment with Gaia. So yeah, that's going to be on March 23rd, and you can go to exopolitics.org to find out more information about that and to register. So now we are going to take a look here to John Warner the Fourth, who I recently interviewed, and he took exception to a short video that made the claim that the Pentagon, its geometry was created by accident, that it's happenstance. And John Warner pointed out that he grew up in the Pentagon because, I mean, he was like a teenager when his dad was the Secretary of the Navy in 1972. So, uh, so John Warner's father was the Secretary of the Navy, and so he had a very senior position within the Pentagon. And so Warner got to learn a lot about the true history of the Pentagon and different figures in there. And Warner uh, was someone that was very relentless in asking questions of people within official positions, and because his father was such a senior figure, first as Secretary of the Navy, and later as a U.S. senator and head of the Armed Services Committee, that people, senior people, we're talking four-star admirals, would confide in John Warner the Fourth and tell him things. So one of the things he learned was that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and General George Marshall were both 33rd degree Freemasons, and they knew the power of sacred geometry. And so the design of the Pentagon is by no means an accident. So, here John Warner says that the Pentagon has the power to move roads and take over land in 1 second if it's a national security issue. Uh, so the claim coming from the person that made this video that says that the odd shape of the Pentagon was due to kind of uh, the difficulty of asserting eminent domain in that area of Arlington where the Pentagon was built is just bunk. That it was designed to be a Pentagon uh, by design, that the Pentagon actually is, in terms of sacred geometry, closely aligned with the pentagram. And the pentagram, of course, is a five-sided star that's very much evolved in occult ceremonies. So there you have uh, that's the shape of the Pentagon. It's a okay, and there. So this article describes different fortifications, ancient forts, and typically arranged as squares and so forth, and how the Pentagon is arranged as a five-sided thing. And this was by accident, but as I said, John Warner takes issue with that. Now let's take a look at a video by Richard Dolan where he did, I think it was a 1 hour video. I watched it because Richard Dolan, he's a very uh, is a very careful researcher. He's very meticulous in what he does in terms of looking at historical reports, and so he came up with a video on 10 key facts about UAPs. He started to use the UAP language rather than the UFO language, and so he has his reasons for that. So he does a good job, I think, in covering in a short period of time worldwide UFO reports, USO reports, that is unidentified submersible objects, craft that come out of the oceans, for example, or lakes, UFOs interfering with Navy ships, Russian UFO reports, UFO crash retrieval. So I think he does a good job in presenting some key facts on that. Now, but he finished in a way that surprised me. He didn't mention contactee reports. That is, people who have entered or traveled inside UFOs and extraterrestrial spacecraft rather than simply seeing ETs from a distance. What Alan Hynek called a close encounter of the third kind. Now, he did cover sightings of UFOs from a distance, but for some reason he didn't think it was important to mention the fact that there are a lot of people, contactees, that have gone inside of the UFOs or the USOs. And that is a bias. That is something that is very unfortunate among many UFO researchers that do like to take that kind of very guarded, careful approach of saying, well, everything we say is documented by facts, and we're not going to say anything that goes beyond established facts. So you can do that, but you're going to miss the big picture here, because going all the way back to the 1950s, people have been reporting that they have been going inside of the extraterrestrial spacecraft. That these reports really are, if you use Alan Hynek's classification system, like a close encounter of the first kind is a, um, let's see, close encounter of the first kind, you see an artifact or some sort of UFO artifact, close encounter of the second kind, uh, you see a UFO. I may be messing that up, but a close encounter of the third kind, you see a extraterrestrial entity up close. So a close encounter of the fourth kind, if we follow Hynek's classification system, would be to see a extraterrestrial up close, to interact with them, to go inside of their craft. So it's very interesting that Dolan doesn't cover these close encounters of the fourth kind. And he's not alone. There are many other UFO researchers that are very skeptical of people that claim to have gone inside of the spacecraft, whether they belong to extraterrestrials or whether they belong to secret space programs. Now, I earlier on mentioned JP. In 2015, JP began sending to me dozens of photos of UFO craft that he has witnessed near a major military base, MacDill Air Force Base, and that he also went inside, or he saw up close. Now, some of the occupants were extraterrestrial, some of the occupants belonged to a secret space program. And the thing about JP, it wasn't just a story. I mean, he had photos, and I had released this on my website, but no one really bothered. Uh, Conventional UFO researchers have this blind spot where, as soon as anyone starts talking about going inside of a spacecraft, whether it's a extraterrestrial craft or whether it's a reverse engineered craft belonging to a secret space program, it's like conventional researchers just, it's like they just don't want to know about it, or they're very skeptical and dismiss it. And so that's a shame, because there are very credible people talking about contact cases and secret space programs. And one of the most credible is William Tompkins, and he worked for the U.S. Navy during the Second World War, and also he was he worked with the um, Douglas Aircraft Company from 1950 up until 1963, and was involved in the first designs of a US Navy space carriers. And so there's a lot of evidence he's presented to support that. But unfortunately, as I said, UFO researchers have this blind spot where they will not seriously consider people claiming to have had contact with extraterrestrials or have been involved in uh, interacting with beings or groups involved in secret space programs. So, to me, this what this says is that people who are putting out a lot of good information, as Dolan does, I think he does put out a lot of good information on UFO reports, USO reports, Russian reports, some of the material on UFO crash retrievals. But if you're not going to cover extraterrestrial contact cases, if you're not going to cover the information contactees are getting firsthand from extraterrestrials, people like Elena Danaan, JP, going all the way back to George Adamski, if you don't cover those stories, then you're missing a big part of the picture. Similarly, if you don't cover people who claim to have been part of secret space programs, then you are missing a big part of the picture. And today, we are in an era of greater transparency. And while I will cut some slack for UFO researchers who genuinely want to just focus on documented hard evidence supporting all of their claims. I think we need to understand that we are at a point where the truth has to be revealed, and if you're not doing that, then you become part of the problem, that you're actually promoting a limited hangout. And so that, I think, is really ultimately uh, the failing of veteran UFO researchers that are putting out a lot of good information, but because of their bias, because of this kind of inherent cautious approach to the data, they will not cover contactee and secret space program witness reports. Okay, so this was a really fascinating remote viewing. This was something that involved 5 remote viewers uh, that are part of the crypto viewing team. And so they remote viewed this rapture, or a global religious event at an unknown time. And so this was a double blind experiment. And in this double blind experiment, the target was given to you have the coordinates for the target was given to a second person who didn't know what the target was. He just had the uh, target coordinates themselves, and then handed them off to the 5 remote viewers. So the double blind, I think, is very important for remote viewing, and this is very controversial because I think that there is a subtle influence in single blind remote viewing where the person handling the targeting can influence the remote viewers because of their very strong beliefs, because of some overwhelming or some kind of grand narrative that they have concerning extraterrestrials. So this is where the double blind remote viewing protocol really stands out, because it prevents a targeter who has a very strong uh, belief system concerning some phenomena, and subconsciously can be influencing the remote viewers, even though they're just giving the remote viewers a set of targets. The person handing off those targets, because they know what the target is, subconsciously can be influencing the remote viewer. That's why you have double blind experiments. That's why the military early on decided to do double blind remote viewing, because they understood that the most accurate remote viewing, the cleanest remote viewing, is where the targeter, that is the person who is handing over the numerical targets to the remote viewers, doesn't know what it is, because in handing it over, their subconscious beliefs somehow get transferred. And so I think it's very important. So this double blind remote viewing involving the crypto viewing team, or now I think they're calling it future forecasters. Okay, future forecasters. All right, so they've changed their name to future forecasters, and so they did this remote viewing of the ascension, of the rapture, of the harvest, and this is something that has been discussed. I think it was probably from 1981 to 1984, where you have the harvest being discussed for the first time. That was in the Ra material. So the Ra material discussed the harvest at length, and ever since that time, there's been a lot of people that have been talking about the harvest, uh, the rapture. That is also very popular in terms of Christian literature. There's been a very famous set of books that have come out about the rapture, and movies, television movies made about the rapture. So there's the Rapture series, and more recently, especially with people engaged in QHHT, or quantum healing hypnosis technique, that many of these people have been talking about the event. And so what these 5 remote viewers did using the double blind protocol was that they were able to confirm the event is real, that it's coming. And they envisage some kind of splitting of humanity, where one portion of humanity would go down the path of evolving consciousness, organic consciousness, ascending, whereas another portion of humanity would go down a path of high tech, becoming hybrids and cyborgs and the whole transhumanist agenda. So they see that split as coming down the road. So very, very interesting and significant that you have these 5 remote viewers all seeing this kind of split coming, or that this event, harvest, or ascension is coming. So that is uh, a very significant thing. Now, you can watch the trailer on YouTube, and if you want to watch the whole thing, I think it went for about an hour and a half. You have to subscribe to their channel, but it's well worth it. I think uh, Dick Allgaier, he and his team do a good job in presenting very clean data on a range of events, some of which involve these kinds of extraterrestrial related topics. They call them woo-woo topics, but the topics that I or exopolitics researchers are very interested in. Okay, so that was the remote viewing. Here's a video that I thought it was very well done by the Y-Files, where they cover the whistleblower testimonies that Linda Moulton Howe has discussed over the last 10 years or so, starting with this Navy navigator, Ryan, who says that he flew over the South Pole and saw a big hole there, that he was part of missions to retrieve scientists that were first missing, and then he brought them back, and also talked about seeing fleets of silver-shaped craft there. And also, this video talked about one of the whistleblowers that Linda Moulton Howe covered, that is Spartan 1, who talked about going to Antarctica and seeing a big picture, a big black. I think he's described it as a kind of pentagon shaped, or a five-sided shaped structure there in Antarctica. So there has been more insiders in addition to those covered by the Y-Files, but this is I think it's well worth taking a look at, especially for those that aren't aware of these particular whistleblowers that Linda Moulton Howe interviewed, Spartan 1, Brian, because I think they kind of set the scene for what has followed with other whistleblowers. And I wrote a book, Antarctica's Hidden History, where I talk about multiple whistleblowers, insiders that have described what's really going on in Antarctica. Also more recently, described insiders, witnesses, participants in secret space programs who have also gone to Antarctica. Jean-Charles Moyen, JP, they are two people that come to mind with significant information on Antarctica. So why the Y-Files well worth watching. Okay, so here's the update that JP just did, where he went into a underground cavern. He wasn't sure where it was. He just describes being taken there on a Black Hawk helicopter, that once he entered the Black Hawk, there were 5 soldiers altogether. He and the others, they were a squad of 5 soldiers. And that once they entered a Black Hawk helicopter, there were other Black Hawks there, pardon me, with soldiers on them, and that they all flew in formation to some secret location, but JP didn't know what that location was, because soon after boarding the Black Hawk, they were given an injection and they blacked out, and then they woke up and they were at the facility. And at that facility, JP describes seeing this giant castle in in an underground icy cavern. And so JP describes going to this place, and you can see, oh, here you have on the left, you can see JP's uh, illustration. I mean, he used AI along with his kind of detailed information about what it was that he saw. So this is what the AI rendered, and JP says it's pretty close to what he saw in this giant icy cavern in an unknown location. Now, JP says that while there were these there was a huge repository of gold bars that were shaped like frisbees, just kind of like circular frisbees. And he says that he's people were loading them into these shipping containers, and each of the shipping containers had a different international location on the manifest on the side. So they knew that they were being shipped to different locations. So JP says that his primary role, he and the others, their primary role was to be a witness to it all. But for about an hour, they helped load one of the containers with the gold. He says that there was a Nordic extraterrestrial and a grey there observing everything that was going on. So that's very important. It gives us an idea, a clue that this gold was being shipped internationally because there was an agreement that extraterrestrials were a party to or were acting as a guarantor for. Now, why was that happening? Why was the gold being distributed? Now, for that answer, I think I did a follow up tweet, which I think gives us a clue. Let's see. This is an article that Joseph Farrell, Dr. Joseph Farrell, he's got a website, the Giza Death Star. He does put out a lot of really interesting material. And here he did an article analyzing the gold, the GDP ratio of the major players. So he analyzed the gold to GDP ratio. And so here you have Russia in terms of their GDP and the percentage of gold that they have in reserve. He said that Russia has 8.3%, Switzerland 7.6%, Italy 7.4%, so forth. The US has a miserly 2%. China, less than 1%, and the United Kingdom, 0.6%. Now, according to Joseph Farrell, now I'm not a financial expert, so don't take my financial advice for anything, and especially on Telegram or on YouTube or Instagram or anywhere that someone approaches you using my name, offers you financial advice. That is a hoaxer, because I know very little about finances. So don't take my word. Either people impersonating me or me physically. I don't know that much about it, but I defer to experts. And Joseph Farrell, I think he makes a very good point that in order for a currency to be gold backed, you need to have about 10% of your GDP in gold reserves. So that means that the gross domestic product of the United States, I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of $30 trillion. So that means that for the US to go to a gold-backed currency, the US needs to have approximately $3 trillion in gold reserves. And that's the same for all these other countries in terms of their GDP and the amount of gold reserve. So what this suggests, what JP witnessed, that is, to me, the answer here is that, well, why are these why is this huge international consortium receiving all this gold that is coming from some location, probably in the US, northern US, somewhere where there's a giant ice cavern, and it is being shipped internationally. I think it's because there is going to be a the launch of a gold-backed currency. Now, people talk about Nasara, Jazara. They've been talking about that for decades. Now, Alex Collier, a good friend, is much more knowledgeable on these topics than I am. But my and he's been talking about this the financial reset, the RV, I think it's called the revaluation or something. That I suspect that these claims of Nasara and Jassara, there's some substance to it. That the conversion from fiat currencies to gold-backed currencies is happening, and that the extraterrestrials want this to happen because that I think will mean that the Earth will be much more stable, and that the extraterrestrials are looking to the US to ensure that this is what's happening. And if you go back to the Jupiter Accords in 2021 that Elena Danaan described. Uh, the Jupiter Accords, what they what they uh, resolved was that the United States would be the chair, would be the lead in setting up an international consortium of spacefaring civilizations that would work with extraterrestrials to take control of our solar system. And that the US would now be responsible. They would ensure that all the technologies, all the discoveries would be shared in an equitable way. Now, since that time, we had the launch of the Artemis Accords. The Artemis Accords were launched around that time, and currently there are, I believe, 36 or maybe 37 nations that have signed on to the Artemis Accords, and I believe, and the Artemis Accords really cement US leadership in space affairs for decades to come. So why are nations lining up uh, behind to sign up the Artemis Accords? I think it's because it's known that the United States not only has the world's largest economy, or uh, certainly the world's most powerful military force, but that it is has been given this role of helping humanity move to a Star Trek future. So I think this is what all this is about. This redistributing the gold is all about creating a Star Trek future where U.S. Space Command is at the center of a future Starfleet that will act as a guarantor for the Artemis Accords, which are civilian agreements between between NASA and the space agencies of other countries. Uh, but the militaries of these other countries, they are signing onto something called this Combined Space Operations Initiative that is being headed by U.S. Space Command, and that is the hub for a future Starfleet. So I think that's really what's going on here with the redistributing of the gold plates, that the United States is ensuring that there is going to be a replacement. This, I guess, is the revaluation that many people have been talking about for decades, or well, for many years, that this is the financial reset is going to happen, and we are going to move very shortly to gold-backed international currencies. So uh, the Federal Reserve note will no longer be legal tender in the United States, and they'll probably have a gold-backed US Treasury note. So that I think is what's going on. Here is another clue as to the location, and this is something that I was discussed with JP in terms of where he took off in Florida and where he ended up. He says he started off early morning, got back late at night. The whole thing took about 18 hours. As I mentioned, once he got onto the Black Hawk, He was, he had a shot. He went to sleep, woke up. He's at the he's at this giant castle, or they land near this giant castle. The mission is conducted. They get they get back into the Black Hawk. He gets another injection. Then he arrives back. Now, one of the things I think that is important here is that JP send me a link to this story about these giant caverns in South Dakota that have been tunneled out or hollowed out from former gold mines. So these gold mines in South Dakota have been hollowed out, and apparently there are these giant caverns in there that don't want to do something in terms of studying neutrinos. But I think that's the cover story. Now, why does JP suspect this area in South Dakota was where he was taken to? We did some calculations in terms of how long it would take a Black Hawk helicopter flying at top speed from the base where he took off in Florida to South Dakota uh, for him to get off, to do the mission, and to then get back on the Black Hawk, and then for that to fly. The whole thing was, we calculated it out to be about 18 hours, and that's about how long JP was gone. And so we suspect that South Dakota was where this giant ice cavern is. Now, other people have speculated that, well, maybe this Black Hawk helicopter flew through a portal and ended up in Antarctica. I mean, that's possible. Maybe the Black Hawk helicopter had some kind of anti-gravity technology or had something else, but JP didn't see that. I mean, what he saw was, I think it was 5 Black Hawk helicopters that were flying around when he arrived at the base to get on, and then when he exited. And if you listen and see, this is one of the things. Now, JP took a video of the departing Black Hawks. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, JP says that when he goes on these missions, all smartphones are confiscated. They're taken away. So the procedure would have been, he would have gotten onto the Black Hawk. He's greeted by one of the crew members, and they say, hand over all your smart devices. So they hand over all their smartphones to the crew member. The crew member keeps it locked up away. They go do the mission, come back. Okay, before they exit the craft, they give them back their smartphones, and now they leave the craft. Now, JP now has his smartphone, and as he leaves, he takes a video of the departing helicopters. So this was a video that of the departing Black Hawk helicopters. So you can hear these. You can hear them. And you see that there's approximately 5, just as JP said. You see the lights. Now, of course, this is at night. JP said this happened around 11 o'clock at night, which is when they got back to the base. So it's at night, but you see the lights, and you hear the sound. So these are not craft using anti-gravity technology. So these are Black Hawk helicopters that can fly up to 220 miles per hour, and they were, at top speed they could reach this location in South Dakota. So, but the important point here is not so much that this proves that JP flew to South Dakota to that ice cavern that was covered in the story, the former gold mines, but it is evidence. People always want evidence that JP is going on these missions. So here you have it, evidence. He took a video of the departing Black Hawk helicopters after his mission. So that is very significant in my mind. Okay, so let's now go to the next story on Twitter. Okay, so there was a lot of speculation over this UFO sighting in Ukraine. And this was covered by several sources, and it really does show some kind of strange object that was filmed by the Ukrainian military, who commented on it. And what is it? Well, I mean, UFOs have long been known to conduct surveillance missions, to monitor events in war zones, to even interfere if there's a threat of nuclear weapons being used. And there have been more than one case of rumors where it was that the Ukrainian military was going to detonate or launch a false flag attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear facility in the Zaporizhzhia region. So, would UFOs intervene to stop a false flag attack that involves the detonation of nuclear weapons? Apparently so. So, that may be related to that. It could be related to these space arcs. I mean, JP and others have talked about a space arc buried in Ukraine. So it's possible that this craft is related to that. So very, very interesting. Okay, so here's the final tweet, and this concerns a statement by the Secretary of Defense for the United States military, Lloyd Austin, a former four-star general, who is saying that the consequences of Russia defeating Ukraine is that it's likely that there's going to be a war between NATO and Russia. Now, to my mind, in listening to this and listening to people like Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, saying that European nations need to militarily place troops in Ukraine because the Ukrainian military is presently losing. In fact, the Ukrainian military is collapsing. The front lines are beginning to collapse. Uh, there have been many astute observers of the Ukraine conflict. The Duran report, Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas McGregor. These are some of the more credible sources, to my mind, that describe the collapse of the Ukrainian military. And as that is happening, the Western nations, the deep state, is in a panic because Russia is breaking through the former defense lines of Ukraine and is going to march westward. And so now there seems to be a full-throated effort to have NATO place armies, their own armies in Western Ukraine. Because what's happened is that not one, not two, but three Ukrainian armies have been set up and defeated during the 2 years of the war. And Ukrainian military is exhausted. There's no more manpower is exhausted. They're conscripting 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. Their women are now fighting. This is the Ukrainian military is collapsing, and the deep state is wanting Europe and the United States to send NATO into Western Ukraine to have a direct military confrontation with Russia if it advances into Western Ukraine, which is going to be happening probably in the next few weeks. So that's how quickly the Ukrainian lines are collapsing. Now, to my mind, this is a bold-faced attempt to manufacture an end times Gog and Magog war by the deep state. The deep state wants to manufacture a third world war because the deep state has used prophecy and religious manipulation to implant the idea that the end times are going to involve a cataclysmic third world war, also called Gog and Magog. This is the Gog and Magog war. And if you haven't heard of that, then I recommend a webinar I did at the end of 2023, and this webinar describes this end time scenario, describes the different religious scenarios, the different actors involved, how prophetic texts have been used, how there have been deep state plans going back to the City of London in 2010. Even previously, you had in the Pentagon, you had the four-star general General Wesley Clark, who described a plan to launch wars against 6 Middle Eastern countries, including Iran. Iran is the last country, is the last holdout, and Iran was part of this region called Magog in ancient literature. So there is an attempt by the deep state to manufacture an end times war. Thankfully, though, people are saying no to this. So more and more Americans are saying no. F you. We don't want to go off and fight. We don't want American soldiers to go off and fight in Western Ukraine in a war that's been contrived. And Europeans are saying pretty much the same thing. So the deep state is panicking. I doubt that they will succeed in getting NATO to go to war against Ukraine, but they're going to give it a shot. They are trying. And so this is where people need to stand up and say no. We need to be very clear that that under no circumstances should US or European troops face off against Russia because this war in Ukraine was contrived. It was not Russian aggression. It was a contrived war that gave Russia no choice but to intervene if it was going to protect the Russian-speaking communities of eastern Ukraine. And similarly, Israel-Palestine, what's happened recently in Israel-Palestine is also part of this Gog and Magog war effort by the deep state. So that's it for this week in review. Again, I have a webinar that's just been announced for March 23. You can register, learn all about it. I think it is going to be pretty essential to find out what it is that the inner Earth, non-human crypto-terrestrials are thinking about surface humanity, what we're doing, what their response is, and what wisdom they have to share. I think these are beings that we need to be cognizant about, but also to begin engaging in a dialogue with. So definitely, I hope you can join me on March 23rd for my next webinar. That's a great way for you to kind of support my work. These week in reviews, all my interviews, they're all put out for free. The only way I get remunerated is through webinars and books. So you signing up for my webinar, that's a great way to ensure that I can continue to put out a lot of free material for your viewing. So thank you for watching, and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.